Hi everyone, and welcome to the Back 40 Feet, where we talk about suburban, urban, and patio gardening. And today's topic is mulch. That is my project for the day, as well as I'm going to be mulching in the herb garden. So I thought now would be a good time to just talk about mulch. Why do we use mulch? So in the winter, you can use mulch to keep the soil warm or to warm up the soil faster so that you could extend your season, and also to protect some of the more tender plants. But I'm not going to really talk about winter mulching right now. I'm going to talk about summer mulching. When you put mulch down, what you're doing is you're helping as a weed block to reduce the amount of work you have to do to weed, and it also helps to keep the moisture in the soil. So if you have a dry summer or a fast draining soil, mulch could really help keep your plants hydrated. But it's also important to think about what kind of mulch you're using. There's a lot of different kinds out there, and they all have good applications for different purposes. So what is most common that you see at the gardening centers is different types of bark mulch. It could be pine or hemlock, and in different grades. And sometimes it could be dyed. I'm an organic gardener. I'm not putting dyed mulch in my yard. But when you look at those mulches, you do have to keep in mind that it can increase some acidity to the soil. I mean, think about it. If you're walking through a pine forest, you don't really see anything growing beneath those trees, and there's a reason for it. That's kind of how they help themselves grow. So when you're using different bark mulches, it's kind of doing the same thing. It's really as a layer, um, functioning to decrease the amount of weeds, but it also can release some natural chemicals to prevent weed growth. For me, I don't mind bark mulch underneath, my landscape plantings, but I don't really want to have it in my vegetable garden. Some people will use plastic mulches, and those are pretty effective at keeping the soil moist, but I'm not a huge fan of plastic mulches because they're usually only good for about one season, and it just seems like a lot of waste. That being said, for some seasons when I've had a lot of white flies, I have used, it's called silver mulch, and it's just that it almost looks like aluminum foil, but it's not quite that reflective, and it functions well as a mulch, and it confuses the flies, so it does help to reduce the amount of white flies that you could get on like your tomatoes. It also can reduce leaf hoppers as well. So, even though it's one season, I'll use it sparingly in places that it looks like I'm starting to get any infestation, so that way I don't have to use any pesticides. Two other mulches that I really prefer to use in my vegetable garden is buckwheat mulch. So these are hulls from buckwheat, and it's a nice kind of cocoa brown color, and it's very lightweight. It's super easy to spread. It does blow, so if you're putting it down, you'd want to kind of think about if there's going to be a couple of days of rain to get it nice and saturated. Um, and you if you have seedlings in the vegetable garden, it's really easy to not have to worry about damaging them when you're spreading buckwheat shell mulch. I like to use that in my front yard. It's just a nice visual. Sometimes it can be a little hard to get. Uh, it looks very similar to cocoa shells, which you can see pretty often at the garden centers. Cocoa mulch is also very good. It does smell like chocolate. Um, if you have a really humid summer, I have seen some mold that can grow on the cocoa shells. So I've tried those a few times. I've stopped using them. And then the other thing I use mostly for my vegetable garden is straw mulch. So straw mulch, it's very light, easy to spread, it's cheap. At the end of the season, I can turn it over, and it can help to lighten the soil. It can, remove some nitrogen from the soil when it's decomposing, but I can make up for that by adding some natural nitrogen fertilizer to the soil at the same time. It's really lightweight, so if I put it someplace and I decide that's not where I want it, I can just move it. Again, if you have seedlings, it's not going to really damage the seedlings. That the straw mulch is kind of as a byproduct from either wheat or barley harvest. So there's really not many seeds in straw, so you're not going to have much of a problem with excess weeds coming in from it. Alternatively, some people will use hay. I won't use hay because hay is really like going out in the field and just harvesting what's growing in these big grassy fields. So you don't know what's coming in with your hay. You can end up with a lot of weeds getting introduced into your garden. So I prefer not to use that. Some people will use lawn clippings. So the grass that you've just mowed, the leftover from that, and that's perfectly fine. My yard's not that big enough, and it would take all season just to get enough mulch into the vegetable garden to make a difference. But again, with either hay, grass, or straw, when they break down, they are going to remove some nitrogen from the soil, so you are going to have to supplement for that. Regardless of what you use, when you are going to spread mulch, it's best to give the soil a really good watering before you spread the mulch so that you already have moisture in the soil. You know, if you've had a couple of good days of rain, that works too. If you're using soaker hoses, they can be underneath the mulch pretty easy. Just remember that they're there. I think that's probably about all I have to say about mulch. So I'm going to go get my straw bales and start on the garden. Here are 3 bales of hay that is 2 stacked on top of each other and 1 on its side that I'm going to put here into my tomato garden. So you can see how I have my tomato garden is set up, that there's a pathway in the middle and then to the side. So I'm going to put straw there. I'm not going to put it underneath the tomato plants for now in case I need to put silver mulch. And then kind of these pathways here between all of the raised bed gardens, I'm going to spread some straw. This is the garden path before I get started between the raised bed gardens, and you can see that I have some fabric cloth. It's pretty heavy duty fabric cloth that I put in last year that is a pretty effective weed barrier. So now that mulch is just going to continue to add to it and also give a little bit of a better visual effect as well. It's about a week and a half since I put the mulch down, so it's sort of all settled down. You can see this is the garden path that's between the raised bed gardens. So I had decided to put the straw down between my tomato plants and the path that was in my tomato plants. And if you recall, I did not have the landscape fabric between the tomato plants on the path. And here you can see in the straw that there are some weeds that are breaking through. Well, that's not a weed, that's a marigold. But here you can see that there's some grasses. But really, overall, it's not that much. And it helps to keep the tomato plants nice and cool for their roots.